Hello everyone and welcome back to another video. Today I wanted to talk about Dutch and some tips that I have picked up along the way in how to make your Dutch sound more Dutch and less like a textbook or things that you've heard on the internet. So let's jump straight into the video and I hope you guys enjoy. So the first thing that I wanted to mention, and the biggest thing that I noticed, was that lots of Dutch native speakers will actually drop the N sound in a lot of different words. So if the N is at the end of a sentence, you don't pronounce it. You definitely write it and you definitely learn to say it, but in natural, normal conversation, it's definitely not pronounced. So an example of this would be in a town's name. For example, Laren would be pronounced Lare. Another example is when you're talking about plurals of things. So, ik heb 2 boeken gekocht would actually be said as ik heb 2 boeken gekocht. So the boeken for 2 books is actually pronounced boeken. The last example of this is for your verbs. Now you would have learned already that lots of Dutch verbs end in en. For a lot of verbs, especially if they're at the end of a sentence, you do not pronounce the N sound. So an example sentence that I have would be something like weten jullie als wij kunnen, krijgen. So that's how you would learn it, and that's also how it's written. You definitely put the N, the EN on the end of all of those verbs. But how I would say it in a normal sentence and in normal day-to-day conversation would be weten jullie als wij kunnen krijgen. So if I did pronounce the N, it was very, very soft, and you sort of smush all those words together. Weten jullie als wij kunnen krijgen. Weten jullie als wij kunnen krijgen. So if you drop that N sound, your sentence will sort of have a little bit more of a flow to it and a little bit more of a natural sound. The second sound that a lot of Dutch speakers tend to not pronounce is the de in goede. So an example of this would be when you're saying goedemorgen. You'll notice that a lot of Dutch speakers actually say goeiemorgen. That D sound in the middle of goede actually becomes a J sound. Goeiemorgen, goeieavond, goeiedag. These are all examples of when that D sound would be dropped. When you don't drop it is if the goed ends on the D sound. So goed gedaan. Goed geslapen. Goed zo. So you keep that D sound in there when the goed ends on the D. But if the D is in the middle of the word, you tend to drop it and the word sounds that little bit more fluid and a little bit more natural when you're saying it. Another thing that I found helped me sound that little bit more Dutch was to practice sounds that I had a lot of difficulty with. Things like G and the A and the O. These are sounds that don't actually exist in English. So a lot of English speakers have trouble with these sounds. So what I would do is write out a sentence using words that have these sounds in them. I would then ask a native speaking friend to record the sentence that I had made for me, and then I would listen to it over and over and over again, and then I would try and repeat it, and then I would try and say it at the same time as the native speaker. So I could actually hear the difference in our 2 sentences, where I wasn't speaking fast enough, where I didn't have the right tone, where I didn't have the right intonation, when I didn't have the right sound. And this is a really good way to improve your accent and really focus on those parts of language and those parts of sound that you're having a lot of trouble with. I know one for me was the air. And I have a bit more of what they say is a gooise air because I can't roll my R properly in a lot of words. Drie, I really have to stop and think about it and make sure that my mouth is all in the right position before the sound actually comes out, which slows down my speech a lot, which then in turn makes it not sound that natural. So I write a lot of sentences that have a lot of R words in them, and R at the start of the word, in the middle of the word, so that I get used to pronouncing it in its different variations. I then would have a friend record this for me, and then I could listen to it over and over and over again. And it really is repetition that makes these sorts of difficult parts of language perfect. Another way to sound a little bit more Dutch when you're speaking is to use words like even and hoor. These are two words that are used to kind of soften what the speaker is saying. So for example, even, which is actually written as E-V-E-N, would actually be said out loud as effe. And when you write it in a text message, you literally write two F's, which is said in Dutch as effe, minus the N sound, of course, because it's a plural. So effe serieus is a way of saying just a moment, be serious. So it's instead of turning to someone and saying serious, you'd say effe serieus, and it makes it a little less direct and a little less rude. Another example of when you could use effe would be even momentje, which would be just wait a second, even momentje. Another good way to use this would be even luisteren. I need to say something, just a second, even luisteren. Instead of turning to someone and saying listen, you're saying just listen, just a second, I'm just gonna say something, even luisteren. And again, you'll hear at the end of that luisteren that I haven't pronounced the N sound. And you could probably already hear that my R in that word is also not really perfect. So the other softening word that we have is hoor. And this is sort of tacked onto the end again to make a sentence not sound so direct and a little less blunt. If someone's asking how you're going, you can say goed hoor, and it sort of just flows off the end of the word. Another way to use hoor is nee hoor, or gaat goed hoor. So this would be in response to answering someone, and yeah, I feel like it just makes the sentence sound a little less direct. I don't think we have an English version of this word, so I don't really know what the translation would be, but it's definitely a word that you'll hear a lot used by native speakers. So if you can listen to those patterns and then adapt them into the way that you speak the language, you'll start to pick up on those little colloquialisms of the language and make yourself sound more natural. So another really good way to sound more natural when you're speaking is to use Dutch fillers. Now I have found a really good video here on YouTube, and I'll link it in the description below. And the teacher goes through all of the different ways that you can use these fillers and specific examples for them. So I'll link to that in the description because this video will get way too long if I try and include them all and give you all new examples. Some of these fillers are things like maar ja, dus, wel, nou, tja. Just to give you a rough idea of the small little words that I'm talking about. These can be used to give yourself some thinking time or to imply something to the listener as well. Now, last of all, I wanted to talk about the word toch. Toch doesn't have an English version, and I remember when I was first learning Dutch, I really struggled with this word because of the reason that it doesn't have an English translation. It can be used in a range of different situations and has I think looking at the definition, it has like 7 different ways that you can use it. I think the most common way is when you're kind of asking a question but not really asking a question. You're looking for confirmation from someone. You're kind of confirming what you know is right by using this word at the end. So let me just give you an example. Something along the lines of, het is een mooie ruimte toch? I'm literally saying it's a nice room, right? So I'm stating that it's a nice room, but then kind of asking the listener to agree with me. Het is een mooie kamer toch? For me, it mostly translates to right in English. That's probably the most frequently way that toch is used in sentences in Dutch. But I think if you listen for it specifically, you'll hear it a lot. You can also just say, ja toch. And that's like, yeah, right? So these were just a few of the things that you can start doing straight away to help your Dutch sound that little bit more natural. I hope you've liked this video. Now, if you haven't seen any of my other Dutch videos where I list all of the resources and tools that I've used to learn the language, I'll link them down in the description below. Go and check them out if you haven't seen them already. I hope you learned something new from this video, and if you did, please give it a big thumbs up and subscribe to my channel. There are a lot more language things to come in the future. If you want me to do a video on anything, leave a comment down below, and I'll see you guys in another video. Bye!